Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopoulos Ideas Lab. All on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning in Washington. Some of you may be around the world in different time zones, but we're delighted to have you with us. My name's John Hamry. I'm the president here at CSIS, and my role today is entirely ornamental. My wife always laughs when I say that, but it's an ornamental, and it's to really turn the stage over to a remarkable individual, Orin Herskowitz, and I will do that just shortly. Let me just say, this is going to be very exciting today. This week-long conference, we talked on Monday about the importance of innovation as a foundation for America's prosperity, for the well-being of our society. We talked about intellectual property yesterday, which was a very crucial conversation. All of this is available on YouTube, and you should go look at it or at the CSIS website. Today, we're really going to talk about what I consider to be the most important part of the ecosystem, and that is technology transfer. We have these marvelous universities around America, and I really credit Abraham Lincoln, who started this with the land-grant schools, but these universities that are engines of creativity all around America, and it's such a powerful thing for us. But how do those ideas find their way into a benefit for all of us as consumers and citizens? And that's through technology transfer. We're going to explore that today. It's going to be an exciting conversation. And I would say that the master of tech transfer is Orin Herskowitz. Orin is the Senior Vice President of Intellectual Property and Tech Transfer for Columbia University. And he is a powerhouse up at Columbia. He's involved in so many. He's an adjunct faculty member there. He serves on a number of boards that are promoting innovation and entrepreneurship. But more than anything, he is the greatest networker and best buddy I have ever met to this community of tech transfer professionals. He is a champion for this community. And for that reason, we've asked him to take the lead in this conversation. And at this point, I have run out of anything that's useful for you to listen to me. So I turn to Orin Herskowitz. Orin, over to you. Thank you so much for being here and organizing this today.
Great. Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate it. I'm actually going to keep it brief too. We have an amazing panel set up here for today. It's going to start off though with a keynote talk from Kathy Koo. And then Kathy will also join the panel, which is going to be great. So first we'll go to the keynote. I've known Kathy for many, many years. And so it's hard. And in fact, I think everyone on the panel has known each other for many, many years. So I think if you get the sense that we've worked together before, it's because we have. I'm going to do as formal an intro for Kathy as I can, which is that she's the Chief Licensing Officer, Chief Licensing Advisor at Wilson Sonsini, the law firm. She ran the Stanford Tech Transfer Office for 27 years. And as many of you know, Stanford has had quite a run during that time. Quite a few startup companies and technologies have come out of that, and has been involved in university and industry relations for over 40 years. Along the way, she's scooped up pretty much every award that you can get in the field. She was the president of the Association of University Technology Managers, or AUTM. She's won AUTM's Bayh-Dole Award. The Licensing Executive Society gave the Stanford office their Achievement Award. She's been a committee member or a reviewer for the National Academy of Sciences, Licensing Executive Society, the NSF, NIST, you name it. She's down in Washington all the time. She's trained as a chemical engineer at both Cornell and also Washington University in St. Louis, and is a registered patent agent. But I think most importantly, and for those of you who've been in tech transfer for a while, pretty much universally beloved across this industry. She's a mentor, a coach, an advisor, and a friend to many of us over the years. And I think what's really impressive is that she comes not only with the experience from the university world. In her new role at Wilson Sonsini, she's actually primarily working with the startups that are trying to license things out of the universities. And so she can really, one of the few people in our industry who can speak from both sides of this equation. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Kathy. I'm sure everyone's going to really enjoy your talk, and I look forward to rejoining with the panel as soon as you're done.
Thank you, Orin, and thank you for CSIS for inviting me to speak. I really feel honored to be speaking to this group. I'm thrilled to be talking about technology transfer. It's a topic near and dear to my heart. I've dedicated my life to it. Technology transfer is, in my mind, one of the keys to ensuring that the US continues to be the most innovative and therefore the most competitive country in the world. Let me say unequivocally that it is completely in our strategic interest to invest in this thing called technology transfer. So what is technology transfer? We all know that knowledge transfer in a university setting happens informally all the time. Researchers talk to each other, there are lots of seminars and meetings to share research results. And then there's scientific publications. They're a key way to find out what's going on in a particular area. But formal technology transfer from the university sector to the private sector is what we're focused on today. And America invented that. I'm one of the very old timers in this business, and I've been part of its evolution for the last 40 years. Although there were a few universities that were involved in tech transfer prior to 1980, the passage of the Bayh-Dole law really started the ball rolling in the US. I joined Stanford at the end of 1979, when they created a job at Stanford that would make it easy for us to comply with the Bayh-Dole law. My first job was to try to make it easier on inventors to disclose inventions to the government so that they would disclose to the university and then we would be able to comply with Bayh-Dole to disclose to the government. My first meeting was in 1980 when the Society of University Patent Administrators, called SUPA at the time, had their annual meeting. 70 people were in attendance. By 1988, I was their president of this relatively small organization, and we decided after a lot of debate to change the organization's name because we thought patent administrators was frankly a really bureaucratic, boring sounding name, and we did far more than just administer patents. So we changed the name to the Association of University Technology Managers, AUTM. That meeting in 1990 had 300 people. These days, AUTM meetings are around 1,000 people, and today lots of people aspire to join this community and do this important work. The university tech transfer community in the US truly started a profession. All research universities throughout the US have established technology transfer programs. And again, today, the US technology transfer system is the envy of the world. The rest of the world is still trying to learn how we do it so well. It is easy for policymakers to think that tech transfer is easy. It is not. University researchers do research for the sake of advancing knowledge, and honestly, most basic research is not commercializable. Basic research is really important, and we need to support it in order for the next step, which is innovation, to happen. What we do know is that some of the results of research have potential to be commercializable, and it is the job of a tech transfer professional to look into the future and try to figure out how technologies and industries will evolve. We heard earlier this week how universities are being intentional about areas of research that they're going to focus on. But the biggest challenge for a tech transfer professional is to figure out what specific technologies in those areas of research that they should invest in. And it's really hard to predict. It's like looking at a bunch of 2-year-olds and trying to predict who they're going to be when they grow up. I wanted to talk about a few cases from Stanford. When Stan Cohen and Herb Boyer invented gene splicing in 1973, they didn't want to file a patent. And even though Stanford finally convinced them that we should, we had to figure out how to transfer this technology to industry. Although Genentech wanted an exclusive license, Stanford came up with a non-exclusive licensing program because we felt that the technology could be used by many companies. But we also didn't know if companies would be willing to take a license at all. We had bets in the office about how many companies would sign up by the December 2nd deadline. They needed to sign up by then to get their special deal. I thought that maybe 5 to 7 companies would sign up. It ended up that Federal Express trucks were delivering licenses to our office, and by the end of the day, 73 companies had signed up for this special deal. By the end of the whole licensing program in 1997, 440 companies were licensees, and these patents were foundational for the biotech industry. The takeaway message from this story is, 1, you have to have good technology and inventors who are willing to work with us. And 2, you have to have companies who are willing to take licenses to university patents. One huge problem for tech transfer is that intellectual property protection is expensive, and many universities have limited budgets, and they can't support all patent filings. And why? Many of these technologies that we file on are not going to be licensed. Often they're too early and companies are not willing to take the risk, or companies don't recognize the value, or in fact, these things are not commercializable for a myriad of reasons. So take, for example, this case in 1996. Stanford received an invention disclosure on a method of ranking documents in a database funded by NSF. It wasn't very sexy and sort of sounded marginal. At the time, the World Wide Web was really still in its infancy, with Netscape only 2 years old. But our licensing person expected that the internet was going to be a big part of commerce, one way or another. So Luis Mejia thought it would be a good bet for Stanford to make investments in internet-related technologies, including search. There was still a lot of uncertainty whether this search technology would work on very large data sets. But it seemed to be worth filing a patent application given the potential market growth. So we filed on it and marketed it broadly. Nobody was interested in it. People thought the current search engines were fine. People, all except Larry Page and Sergey Brin. These 2 graduate students decided to license that technology and start a company out of pure frustration that the market didn't recognize it. Stanford had no reason to think that they would be successful because they had no experience in business, but they had fire in their bellies. Google was born. Nothing more needs to be said about Google and its impact on our lives today. But there are many takeaway thoughts here. 1, the licensing person had to decide this technology was worth spending money on, and the answer could have easily been no. Software patents don't always issue, and often they're very expensive to prosecute. What if we had a limited patent budget and couldn't afford to file on this invention? Secondly, nobody was interested in it. This is the story for too many university inventions. It could have easily died. All universities have too many early stage inventions that are not being licensed. They're just sitting on their shelves. The third point is not all ecosystems would have been supportive to 2 kids wanting to start a company. It's changed nowadays somewhat, but in the early years, it wasn't the case where we would necessarily want to license kids. Stanford faculty were supportive, and the licensing office was willing to work with unproven entrepreneurs. We need to create more ecosystems like Silicon Valley. And lastly, the company could have failed. There was competition from other search engine companies who everybody thought was perfectly fine. If they had had a hard time raising venture capital, they would have failed and not been able to thrive. And this is the problem in many geographical regions in the US. So there are many points where this story could have ended differently. My last Stanford story is that Researchers at universities collaborate all the time and in very positive ways. Stanford and Columbia researchers came up with a new way of making monoclonal antibodies. We had jointly decided to file a patent application, but the patent application sat in the patent office for 14 years. Although it was licensed to a smallish biotech company, everyone had given up on that patent, except for the patent attorney. She slogged away at it for years on her own time and own dime, and eventually she got a patent to issue. In the meantime, this biotech company, Centocor, was acquired by Johnson & Johnson, who used our method to develop many of their antibody products like Remicade for arthritis, ReaPro for cardiac problems, Erbitux for head, neck, and colorectal cancer, Stelara for psoriasis, and many, many more products. This platform has helped so many patients. The takeaway on this story is you don't have to license startups for technology to be successful, but you do have to have dedicated people, whether it be the inventors, the patent attorneys, company visionaries. These people have to believe in this technology. And secondly, very often tech transfer happens much more than just once. It goes from the inventors to the university licensing office to maybe a small company to then hopefully a big company. But either way, the transfer is very difficult at each stage of the development. These three stories are all very different, but they were the top three in revenue producing inventions for Stanford. We weren't looking for the next big deal, or did we necessarily think that these technologies would bring in a lot of revenue? We were just trying to do what was best for the technology to get it out there, one good, reasonable deal at a time. I'm very much a believer in the philosophy that transferring as many technologies as possible and letting the marketplace decide which ones will be the winner is the way to go. As we heard on Monday, university tech transfer offices are called on to do much more than patent licensing. They're viewed as an important link to entrepreneurial activity, startups, economic development in the region. And as we heard on Tuesday, intellectual property protection is really important for small and medium-sized companies. We as a country need to support the geographic areas that are not necessarily known to be innovation hubs. I was lucky to be at a university that was entrepreneurial from its founding days, where the provost was considered the father of Silicon Valley, and he gave Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard $100 to start their company. Stanford's tech transfer office grew with venture capital, and we both thrived together. But this doesn't happen overnight. Entrepreneurial faculty beget entrepreneurial students who then leave for other universities in other regions. We can spread the entrepreneurial spirit. Although I spent most of my working life in Silicon Valley, I grew up in and went to graduate school in St. Louis, so I know what it's like to be in the middle of the country. I also went to school in Ithaca, New York, rural upstate New York. And I'm involved with a group that believes strongly that universities in the middle of America are the next frontier. As was said on Monday, non-coastal regions have a lot to offer. What I think we should do is to remind the business community that diversification is a good thing. They don't need to put all their eggs in the coastal baskets. At Wilson Sonsini now, I work on the other side of the table, helping startups pull technology from universities. I would like to help reduce the friction and close the cultural gap between the university and company sectors. It's not easy for these companies to take a big risk on early stage technologies. They too have to be optimistic that the potential will come to fruition in a reasonable time frame. Startups spend a lot of time worrying about how they're going to fund the development of these products. Everyone on both sides of the table have to make a big leap of faith when they invest in the right technology and the right company to develop products for the marketplace. It does take a village to move technology from the university to the private sector to the public. And we in Tech Transfer do this every day for the benefit of society. There are thousands of innovations coming out of universities every year. Some of these will make it to the marketplace and make a big difference in our lives. We need to support technology transfer, perhaps with basic budgetary help with patent filings. I think the country could provide more proof of concept funding for embryonic ideas. We need to provide more support for fledgling entrepreneurs in underdeveloped innovation ecosystems. And we need to encourage investment capital to diversify geographically and invest in up-and-coming innovation hubs. Technology transfer is the key to maintaining US's competitiveness edge. And the better we do it, and the more we support it throughout the country, the stronger we will be as a nation. Thank you.
Kathy, thank you so much. It's really great. It's a really great perspective. It's also, I mean, I was struck by the Google story, which obviously I know from the past. And Luis, it's amazing to think that Luis described the day that happened. But it's interesting to reflect. I looked it up while we were talking. Google now has almost 140,000 employees. Yeah. So that company, it's not just, yes, it was a lot of money for the founders. It was a lot of money for Stanford. It's obviously a company we know. It's changed the face of the internet, but it's also led to 140,000 jobs. And considering the focus in the panel today, that's obviously the brass ring we're all aspiring to. But it is an example of the impact that tech transfer can have. That could have easily gone the other way, and we never would have known what we've missed. Okay, so with that, I will bring on the rest of the panelists. So if we could get them on screen, and maybe I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce themselves, and take not only the institution they work for and what their role is there, but a little bit about themselves as well, what their background was, and maybe if we could also talk about just for a moment, why did you get into the tech transfer field in the first place? What about this appealed to you? And how did you enter the profession? So first, Lesley Millar-Nicholson, I will ask you to go first.
Thank you, Orin, and thank you, Kathy. Always great to hear you talk. It's my pleasure to be here, and as Orin has asked, I'll do a little intro of myself and then pass on, I think, to Kelly. So I have been the director of the licensing office at MIT now for 5 years. I also am the director of a small team of catalysts involved in industry engagement. I came to MIT from the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, where I had been previously for 14 years, about 10 of which was as the director. And how I got into tech transfer is a very long story, which I won't bore you with. But effectively, I came to the United States in 2000, knew nothing about tech transfer, became an intern because I needed, as an international student, to stay on campus. Discovered an office that was itself being rediscovered and rebuilt. The whole entrepreneurship ecosystem at the time at the University of Illinois was in itself being rebuilt, including a research park, an entrepreneurship incubator, etc. And so I've got experience from both those Midwest, middle of the country regions, and what it takes to build those systems and the engagement needed from all parties, state, regional, and other, as well as now the richness of an ecosystem that exists in Boston. So Orin, if that's enough, I will hand over, I think, to another panelist. Thank you.
Kelly, how about you go next?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Orin, and thanks so much for the invitation to be part of this panel. So I'm largely the product of kind of public investment in public universities. I started at the University of Georgia, where the citizens of that state were generous enough to give all students who could keep a B average a full scholarship to any public university in the state. From there, I went to UC San Diego and did my PhD. Brief detour to the privates and did a postdoc at Stanford, where I got interested in tech transfer. Like Lesley, my foray into the career started with an internship, and Kathy Koo was kind enough to give me that first spot as an intern in the Stanford Office of Technology Licensing. From there, I went to the Research Triangle area of North Carolina, running the tech transfer office at North Carolina State University, from starting there as entry level and running the office from about 2012 to 2018, when I got the call to move up to the University of Michigan. I think University of Michigan is a great university to have a part of these kinds of conversations, because we're a very large public research university. We have about $1.6 billion in research activity on our campus each year, which typically puts us in the #2 spot behind only Johns Hopkins for volume of research activity. We have a very diverse research portfolio with strengths in medicine and engineering and a variety of disciplines. And we're doing all of this in a quintessential, lovely Midwestern college town of around 130,000 people, tens of thousands more on a football Saturday each fall. So that creates some challenges that I think we'll get into in the panel, but it also creates a lot of opportunity for us to try things at U of M that could be translated to other areas of the country that have great research. So thank you, Orin.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kelly. Steve, if I could call on you next.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thank you, Orin. My name is Steve Susalka. I'm the CEO of AUTM, the organization that Kathy mentioned a little earlier today. That organization is focused on supporting and advancing technology transfer. And in fact, everybody, all the panelists on this call are members of AUTM, and we are focused on advancing those next generation of inventions into the next commercial products and services that you're going to use every day. Orin, I think it's a fantastic question to ask. How did you get into the field? Because nobody goes to school to learn how to get into tech transfer. And instead, what happens is you kind of meander into it. And so we've heard two interesting stories of how you got there. My own story is I've always loved talking, thinking, science. I had a PhD, I have a PhD in neuroscience. And along the way, I realized, look, I don't want to spend the rest of my life pipetting. I actually want the benefit of the science that I'm doing to turn into products. And along the way, I learned about this amazing field of tech transfer that's focused entirely on that. And in fact, of the 3,000 or so members of AUTM, we have many that come from either the science or business or legal professions, with a goal of advancing those next generation of intellectual property. I initially worked at the University of Virginia, where one of their key products was a drug called Adenocard, which treats supraventricular tachycardia, found on every ambulance in the United States. Then I moved on to Wake Forest, and Wake Forest in North Carolina, that was known as creating a medical device called the vacuum assisted closure device that actually has saved more lives in the field of battle than any other medical device. So that experience just showed me that you've got two different institutions, each of which have taken their prodigious research bases and turned it into some amazing products that have benefited society and the economy. Thanks, Orin.
Great, thanks. And Steve, actually, just as a note, Kathy mentioned that back when this was, when she went to her first industry meeting, the patent managers, there were 70 people, and now there's around 1,000 people at the AUTM meetings. How many total members does AUTM have?
So, in non-COVID years, we are at, about 3,000 members. And in fact, our annual meetings have continued to grow. One of the most recent ones had about 2,000 members. So, and we build on the shoulders of giants like Kathy.
Okay. Great, thank you. All right, Julie, over to you.
Thank you so much, Orin. And again, thank you for inviting me to be on such an esteemed panel. So Julie Lenzer, I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at the University of Maryland. If you're not familiar with Maryland, we are a US News top 20 public institution, nearly 1.1 billion in combined research with our University of Maryland, Baltimore. On our campus, we're about 570 million, which combined makes us 8 among publics and 14 overall. So Michigan, we're gunning for you. Just kidding, but not. We're also in Princeton Review. We've been a top 10 entrepreneurship program for undergraduates and alumni for the past 5 years. And that's been since I've been here. And just one little note, Sergey Brin did his undergraduate at the University of Maryland. So you're welcome, Stanford, for passing along a well-educated inventor. So personally, I am probably a little bit of the outlier in the group. I am a recovering entrepreneur. I am recovering public appointee, a political appointee from the Obama administration. And I have no doubt that when I leave academia, I'm going to need some recovery there as well. But my background is as a technical, I built and sold a software company. And then I got into teaching entrepreneurship, and that's how I got into tech transfer, actually. I started teaching a program that was funded through the National Science Foundation called Activate, which was geared towards helping women to start tech-based companies, specifically around tech transfer. I actually licensed the program myself from a university, so I went through the tech transfer process, and that was one of my spectacular failures, in that we started a nonprofit in 2009. Horrible time to start anything, but we did have a tremendous impact in touching over 300 women in 3 different states, helping them to start businesses around technology. Then I was called into the Obama administration as the director of the Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, which is where I had the privilege of meeting Orin and a number of other folks through the NACI, the National Advisory Council for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, which I ran for the secretary. And while I was there, I was privileged to be able to create what is now called the Regional Innovation Strategies Program, or Build to Scale, as it is now. When I walked into the office and had a couple things on my desk, they said, you need to figure out how to get this grant out. And that's where it was born. And in the 2.5 years I was there, we put out $40 million worth of grants across the country to help communities to commercialize technology and build ecosystems, and have created over 14,000 jobs and a couple $2 billion in investment. And so it's something I'm really proud of. So I do come at this from a little bit different perspective, and excited to share my experiences and insights with the rest of the panel.
Great, thank you, Julie. So by way of introduction, I'll be brief because I've already, because I was introduced earlier by John. Orin Herskowitz. I run the Tech Transfer Office at Columbia University. Although I think, and maybe we'll come back to this later, that's the job when I took it. I would say the job I have now 15 years later looks almost nothing like what it was 15 years ago. The expectations for what's for universities in the role they play in innovation ecosystems has changed so much over that time that I think we've all been scrambling to catch up. And if you think about the scale, and before that, I'm an English major with an MBA. I'm not a science, I have no background in science or law. I was at the Boston Consulting Group doing generalist strategy work for 7 years, during which time we did a project for the Bloomberg administration here in the city of New York. And the question was, how could New York ever hope to become a tech and biotech hub the way that other places like San Francisco and Boston have? And as part of that, naively, we thought, well, maybe universities have something to do with that. And it turns out they did. And so in learning about that, I stumbled across this thing called a tech transfer office. Had no idea what it had done. It managed to get through college and grad school without discovering that either of my universities had one of those. But learned about it, and it seemed fascinating. And it was really particularly appealing to me because of the impact it had, the chance for the impact it has in our local and regional and national economy, and moving these products to market that can change people's lives. So it's been truly rewarding since then. It's striking. I was just reflecting while people were talking. If you add up the number of inventions that just the schools represented on this panel have in a given year, it's about 2,500 new scientific inventions that get submitted to our offices every year. And this is each one of which could be a Google, could be a Senecor, could be a cure for cancer or cystic fibrosis, could be a new vaccine candidate or test for the next pandemic. So that's what drives us to get up in the morning. What's equally interesting, I think, is if you add up the number of licenses that happen across these institutions every year, it's somewhere around 700 licenses. So of those 2,100 inventions, there are about 700 licenses. That means a technology born at the university makes its way out into a startup or into an existing company to begin its journey to a product or service on the market that can have a positive impact on people's lives. So these are a huge number of shots on goal for the thing that could be the next thing that changes the economy. And so, but a lot happens between that invention and that license. And so, Steve, I'm going to put you on the spot here as the president of Autumn. Could you just, like, how do you, when you're at a cocktail party and someone says, what is university tech transfer? How do you answer that question? And why do you think that what we do actually matters?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think it's best summed up by a past Autumn president that said, tech transfer is a war and peace profession in a bumper sticker world. And I think that's a great way of describing it. But what is tech transfer? Before I actually answer that, I want to let everybody on the call know that you have actually been impacted by tech transfer, whether you know it or not. So if you have ever taken Allegra to treat your allergies, you can thank Georgetown because they developed the active compound. If you've ever known someone who's kicked the nicotine habit with a nicotine patch, you can thank UCLA. If you had a Honeycrisp apple with lunch yesterday, you can thank the University of Minnesota. And as I'm sure everybody on this call has done, worn an N95 mask. You can thank the University of Tennessee for developing that technology. Technology transfer is that collaborative and creative endeavor that takes research and turns that into the products and services of tomorrow. That's what we do. And so, as Orin mentioned, everybody on this call has been responsible for taking those prodigious inventions and research bases at their institutions and turning them in and identifying cutting edge inventions that can turn into the next Google or the next one of 200 drugs and vaccines that have been developed out of universities. Now, those have an amazing amount of impact. And I want to talk just for a second about impact. That impact is societal. So again, you've got 200 drugs on the market, but for university tech transfer would have never left the lab bench and turned into a product that's taken by your grandparent, your daughter, or anybody else. So you've got that impact of society. But you also have, as has been touched upon earlier, this economic impact. That invention creates a company, or perhaps it's absorbed by or licensed by an existing company that hires more staff. That could be your neighbor down the block, your partner, anybody that now provides this additional economic benefit to your city, and then therefore your county and your state. So Google is a great example of how that can grow. So tech transfer, why do we get up in the morning and do what we do? We do it because we can actually make the world a better place. We've done that with the thousands of inventions. I loved Orin highlighting the inventions solely by the people here on the call. Autumn has been collecting data on the development and commercialization of intellectual property for over 40 years. And so just in 2020 alone, and granted, that was a crazy year, 27,000 technologies were developed. 10,000 license agreements were signed. Over 900 new products came on the market because of that. So that's way more than an elevator speech, but as you could tell, I am passionate about this, and there's so much more to tell.
Thanks, Steve. I'm also I should note, I think this may not be the normal panel discussion. We've all known each other for a very long time. And so I've encouraged everyone to just jump in and talk whenever they feel like talking and take the questions where they want to go. So it may have more of a dinner party vibe than a typical panel vibe, although I'm guessing without the bottles of wine, although I don't want to speak for anybody. But maybe just to get things started, I thought that was a really good explanation. Maybe if each of you, or if any of you who felt inspired, could give an example of a technology, sort of one of your favorite projects that you think sums up the role that we play at universities. And Lesley, I'll start with you from MIT, and then we can just go around from there.
Sure, thanks, Orin, and thanks, Steve, for those great examples as well. And I think we already heard from Kathy some examples from Stanford. I'd actually like to give two examples, one fairly recent and immediate, and one a little longer that came out of MIT, and as has already been talked about, talks a lot about collaboration. And what I want to try and just demonstrate, as my colleagues have and will, I'm sure, later on, is the pace of innovation and the need to meet society's needs specifically, and what it takes to get those things done. And I'm going to talk first about something that has occurred in the last 2 years and is directly relevant to everything we have been experiencing due to the COVID pandemic. And it's about a website and a calculator that is available to anyone who is willing to sign an end user agreement, and it's the Testing Impact Calculator. It was created by innovators at both MGB, Mass General Brigham, and members of staff at the MIT Institute of Data Systems and Society. And what it does, and again, people, you might be saying, why is that tech transfer? The knowledge, the research, the testing that went into making this calculator freely available through an end user license agreement was significant because it is meant to allow people to assess what they should be doing to reduce the potential for breakouts of COVID based on the prevalence of COVID in their environment, whether people are wearing masks, what their vaccination rate is, the size of gatherings, whether these are indoor or outdoor events. So we have seen an uptake of 60,000 users over the past 8 months downloading this calculator from government agencies, the CDC, schools, and this was put in place around September, October last year, just as people were beginning to think about what will it take for us to get back to normal. So the work of these employees and the funding from Rapid Acceleration of Diagnostics at an NIH initiative built specifically for commercialization of COVID-19 testing was pretty significant. And that in and of itself is tech transfer. People collaborating together, getting tools, software, whatever, freely available, nothing being charged for this apart from obvious indemnification provisions, because this is such an important thing to get on the market. And so that was a click-through license. It's on whentotest.org. You can have a look at it. And it's a great example of a short-term get it out there. And I've got one other, if you just bear with me, Orin. And that is something that is a coating, a durable, slippery coating. And think about this. What do you think could both reduce manufacturing costs, possibly save lives, and also reduce the frustration that each and every one of us have when we can't get the last of the toothpaste out of the toothpaste tube? Well, this is something that was created in the labs of MIT, disclosed to us in 2011 by Kripa Varanasi and Dave Smith. They used every conceivable innovation, entrepreneurship program at MIT and in the mass area, from Mass Challenge to the 10K, now 100K competition at MIT. They founded a company in 2012. They got a license from us in 2013. They got the first round of funding in 2017, had their first commercial sale reported, and now have partnerships with many large companies throughout the world, not just at MIT. But that was, if you think about it, 2011 to 2021, it took to raise $50 million and just begin to have these strategic partnerships. And a technology, a coating, and the company is called Liquiglide. You can look at their story. It takes a long time. It takes a lot of investment. And as Kathy mentioned, it takes everybody from the inventors to the attorneys to the companies and many others to make this ecosystem work. So those are my two examples. I know, by the way, that was NSF and DoD funding into that technology. Thanks, Orin.
Julie,
Yes.
thank you, Lesley. Julie, it looks like you've, would you like to share something?
Sure. And I'm glad you were the one who talked while you were in mute, because I was sure it was going to be me first. So thank you for breaking the ice on that. So just really quickly, if you've ever used internet on an airplane, that technology came out the University of Maryland. But one of the things I wanted to bring this up and why it's interesting is that the university actually got nothing out of that. So it just talks to the complexities of spinning these technologies out. It's not always about the $1 billion, endowment that you get coming in and in. Sometimes you give away technology because it's the right thing to do to get it out, and it's not necessarily coming back financially to the university. So I just wanted to throw that one out there.
That's a really important point. I mean, we've, Kathy mentioned the Senecor, the patents for the chimeric monoclonal antibodies earlier, and something like that or Cohn Boyer generates hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars for the universities. And so at Columbia, we've received, I think, something over $3 billion worth of licensing revenues over the years. But the vast majority of our technologies don't generate anything at all. And some of that is because the products fail, which is understandable, but some of that is because it wasn't appropriate in the moment for those technologies. So we've done, one of the licenses we're most proud of in recent years was a what we call the spiritual care card, which was invented by the chaplain at the hospital associated with Columbia, to help, if many of you have been in a hospital situation where a loved one can't speak and can't advocate for themselves, they often have a pain card where people identify how much pain they're in. In this case, it was spiritual pain. It was, how would you like to be treated when you're in the hospital if you can't speak? Would you like to be prayed with, or would you like someone to hold your hand, or would you like to speak to your family, or just sit quietly or listen to music? And that was an invention that really deserved to get out into the world, but was not obviously something that was going to create billions of dollars. And that was still something we were very proud of getting out there. It also, Lesley, your story made me reflect upon one of my favorite recent stories out of Columbia. So a faculty member named Henry Colcraft up at the Medical Center, who he and Scott Canner, his graduate student, came up with a really interesting innovation about how to manipulate the ion channels, which, I won't get into it because I wouldn't be able to explain it, but in a way that essentially rescues proteins that are perfectly usable proteins in the body, but in certain diseases get thrown out. So things like cystic fibrosis and long QT syndrome and certain cancers. And they came up with this innovation based on millions of dollars in federal funding from the NIH, and then came to our office excited about it and filed patents. And they brought them to market, and all those early stage venture capitalists that had always told us they were super interested in taking early stage risk said, this looks great, it's not ready yet, go back and get more data. So the team went back and we ran them through one of our lab to market accelerator programs and trained them in entrepreneurship and how regulatory processes work, and they got a new data package together. They went back to the market, super excited, and they met with the VCs, and the VCs said, this looks great, it's a little bit too early, go get more data and come back to us. And so they ran through the program again, and actually we gave them a little bit of proof of concept funding out of Columbia. And the time when they went back to the market, they got the results they wanted. And in fact, a new company was launched called Stablix, which is launched just a couple of months ago, raised $63 million in their Series A, and is launching in Washington Heights across the street from Columbia University. And we'll be employing local people here. So, but it's amazing to me how many tries that took. And so I think one of the misconceptions people have in our field is that this is easy, is that, when you get a Google, it just goes and becomes one of the biggest IPOs that in U.S. history, and that when you get a Liquid Glide or a Stablix, that just waltzes out of the labs. And so, in your experiences, how does this work in reality? How hard is this? And what are some of the common challenges that these technologies have that the universities need to help them overcome? Maybe I'll throw that to Kelly to start us off with.
Yeah, Orin, I'm happy to jump into that. And I just have to say, because Steve shared one of my favorite stories, which is the wound vac. That was one of my first encounters with tech transfer. Was my grandmother was healed thanks to the wound vac. And I remember when I heard that had come out of Wake Forest, just how grateful I felt towards the institution. So I just had to share that, and that's part of why I really just love this profession, all of its contributions. So, the biggest challenge is we're trying to help essentially faculty amplify the impact of their research and scholarship, and to do that, through commercialization. Our biggest challenge is around helping them go from, great idea, new research discovery, new technology, and advance it towards something where we can have a serious conversation with entrepreneurs and investors about a startup company, or a serious conversation with a company about directly licensing. And that is a huge gap. And so, Orin, you were talking about putting a program through one of your translational research programs. We've also, over the years, developed translational research programs that we run in partnership with our state economic development arm, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, specifically to help de-risk these early stage technologies within the academic labs and advance them further down the road through some key milestones, so that then we can start to have those conversations. So that's a gap that I think is common to every university. We all experience that very early valley of death that can happen within the academic setting. And it's also the place where an NIH or a National Science Foundation grant typically ends, and we have to find some other mechanism to bridge that gap. So I think translational research funding is a huge unmet need to help move more technologies to the marketplace. A second challenge for us is in finding the business talent to build new companies. We have no shortage of technical talent. We have incredibly brilliant faculty and graduate students, but our challenge is really finding the lead entrepreneur, and then building out that startup team that's going to take the risk and move that technology to the market. Another challenge that we have in our region is access to early stage risk tolerant capital. That's a huge gap for the state of Michigan, for our region. I think you'd hear something similar from any of my colleagues that aren't located in the Bay Area, New York, or the Boston area, that this is just a challenge for us.
Orin, can I jump in too? So I just all agree with everything that Kelly said. I think too that we have to think about this in a number of different ways with regard to the challenges faced by tech transfer offices and universities related to one specific technology. How do you deal with the nuances of a brand new technology, a brand new market, something that doesn't exist yet, and how to create a market for that? The people who are doing it, and I will say that MIT has some great programs where they are very specific, and they say, we're training the person. We don't care what the technology is. We want to train entrepreneurs. So having people who understand what the challenges are, who become more prepared to have the patience, as Orin described, to go through several iterations of no before getting to yes. And then another area, aside the funding that Kelly talked about, which is specific to the technology or the startup or the investment needed, are the operations. And I think the operation of a tech transfer office is often seriously overlooked, because one of the biggest pain points for any tech transfer office is having qualified people and having a budget to do what they need to do to invest for the long term. So when you have an operation like MIT or Michigan or Stanford, and you have a reasonable patent budget to be able to invest, we can take and make hard choices. We can take more risk, and we do, and we have over 10,000 issued pending foreign patents and US patents that we are literally trying to find homes for. But if you were an office who's given $250,000 to manage an entire 20-year life cycle of a patent, then it becomes impossible to do what tech transfer offices need to do, which is lose some money in the long term. And Kathy talked about this. It's effectively that for every dollar you spend on a patent, you're lucky each year to get 40 cents back on that. if you can, even with a fully functional tech transfer office. So when we talk about challenges, I think we need to think about them in ways of the technology and the people related to the tech transfer itself. And then we also have to talk about and invest in, and I'm very pleased to see some of the initiatives coming out of the government at the moment, in the operations themselves. And that needs to spread to university administration so that they recognize the value of these offices and don't undersell what it will take for a long-term investment in tech transfer.
So Lesley, thank you for saying that. And I'm glad you did not mention University of Maryland when you said large patent budgets, because that is one of our struggles. And it is truly a struggle, but I wanted to share too, another challenge. One of our companies, IonQ, they're making the world's best quantum computer. And of course I can say that because it's like my own children, right? But I'm looking at, we developed a timeline of the resources and the time that it took to get to where they are today, this overnight success that you often see, right? So Dr. Chris Monroe joined the University of Maryland in 2007, and his first technology disclosure came in 2012. That disclosure then was licensed in 2015 to 16. They incorporated in 2016. They closed their Series A round later that year. And then, so that was, that was 2019. And then this month they're going public through a SPAC roll-up at a $2 billion valuation. So it's a really exciting success. And I can talk for a while about quantum computing and talk about the impact in drug discovery and in climate and energy. But that's not an overnight, that's a long time that it takes to get there. And they still have a ways to go. The staff hours, we added the staff hours that went into supporting this. And by the way, they file all their own patents. So we don't even have to support them with a patent budget, thank goodness, because we wouldn't be able to. But it still requires our staff to go in and to negotiate and to work because we still own the patents. Over 3,600 hours of staff time went into that. And so Lesley, to your point, those resources, it's not always the sexy part of it, but it's the required effort that has to go into increasing your chances of having a hit, right? I love the way Kathy said it. It's, how many, you need to get it out there because you just don't know the market conditions, and there's so much in the business community that could make this a success or not. It doesn't have to be the best technology to be successul. And in fact, many of the best technologies are never successful because of the timing in the market. But we need to make sure that we get more at bats. And in fact, when I first joined, I was searching for a tech transfer office, and in the interim, I was pretending to be one. And I bought the office all scratch-offs, lottery scratch-offs. And I gave it to them and I said, look, if you don't play, you can't win. This is what we have to do with our technology. We've got to get it out there.
That all makes a ton of sense. I think this focus on money, I mean, it's interesting when people think about tech transfer, they often think about the money that is generated by these inventions, but it's often lost how much this costs. You're taking patent bets. You've got to hire staff to manage these inventions. And these are complicated staff to hire because it's like a combination of a venture capitalist and a business development person and a scientist and an attorney. These aren't easy people to find and retain. You've got to find the entrepreneurs. You need the proof of concept funding. There's just like so many demands on the capital. And yet I think all of us would say, as successful as the universities that are represented here have been, we are not the center of what a university is about. Like a university is about pushing the boundaries of knowledge, training the next generation of leaders in the world, impacting our local communities. Increasingly, this so President Bollinger at Columbia calls this the fourth purpose. And he's talked about how the modern university needs to not only do those first three purposes, training the next generation of leaders, pushing the boundaries of knowledge, and impacting your local community, but needs to have a real world impact. And so it's increasingly becoming something that people care about. But fundamentally, there's lots of ways universities invest money in those other purposes. And so it is very heartwarming to me to see so many interesting proposals going on in the federal government right now to help bring some relief to the research institutions, both the federal research labs and the universities, to help them do the job. I mean, imagine what the US would look like now if Kathy's office at Stanford hadn't had the money to take a risk on that early stage patent, which was by no means obvious. Or if, the invention that Kathy talked about that was shared between Columbia and Stanford for monoclonal antibodies that was licensed to a company who tried to make a go of it and then gave up and returned it. And the completely rational thing for a cash-strapped university to do at that point would have been to drop the patent and stop the work. And instead, we kept it alive, and it turned into all those drugs that Kathy mentioned, which would not have been come to market were it not for that, for those inventions. And so Steve, I'm gonna ask you, there's a lot of exciting, there's in the Endless Frontier Act and USICA, the FASTER proposal, but for universities that don't have the resources that an MIT or a Stanford or Columbia have, for the state universities or the smaller private colleges or universities around the country, what relief should the federal government bring to this?
Right. So that's an excellent question. And so there are a number of different aspects that lead to the answer to that question. So number one, we have to think about, we're all taxpayers here at the United States. United States invests about $150 billion into research. Of that, about $50 billion every year goes into universities. That leads to the amazing research that's occurring at those institutions. But the bottleneck is taking those inventions and turning those into the next generation of products and services. And we talked about some of the challenges there that are often just infrastructure based. So, and Kathy mentioned in her keynote the importance of the Bayh-Dole Act. The Bayh-Dole Act allowed universities to maintain the rights to their intellectual property, which really just blossomed into the development of inventions and again, tens of thousands of inventions every year going forward. What has not occurred to date has been a federal strategy on investing in the advancement of those inventions. So there's the investment in the research. There is not the investment in the advancement of those research into products. Now, yes, there are some wonderful programs like SBIR and STTR, which provides little pushes, which is very useful. What's really reassuring is in some of the recent legislation you mentioned. So specifically, the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, USICA. There is a really interesting provision in there, Section 2109, that actually, for the first time, is devoting resources to supporting tech transfer offices. One of the things that's really great about that is that tech transfer support would be available to any tech transfer office. Innovation happens across campuses across the entire country. Yes, you've got 4 wonderful institutions here that are developing innovations, but there are hundreds of others. So one of the things that's very attractive, and again, it's in the Senate passed bipartisan USICA legislation that was passed that allows for investment in the actual inventions to advance them to the commercial products, to provide that patent budget, to provide the personnel budget, to provide the de-risking money to try out a technology to see, does it actually work the way the inventors expect? I think that's really, really positive. And in fact, it's not an understatement to say that that is, and depending, now it's on the House side, that could be one of the most impactful pieces of legislation to tech transfer since Bayh-Dole. And that is a huge statement in our field.
And Steve, I think it's important, and maybe I'll actually ask Kelly and Julie to weigh in on this one. But when you think about the legislation, so if that, if the federal government if we waved a magic wand and made USICA pass, and by the way, we're very grateful to our hometown Senator Schumer for getting the Endless Frontier Act off the ground. We're thrilled by that. But all of these bills, and and actually the NSF is doing a great job trying to think about how to launch this new directorate and how to focus on it. It's a big challenge. But if we could wave a magic wand and just make all that happen and sort of bring the rest of the country along in terms of the spending, both from the well-heeled institutions and the institutions in the major tech hubs, if we could bring the rest of the country's research engines up to that level, I think it's important for us to think about what difference would that make? Like, why is that important? And why is that important? Not just, we've talked a lot about the products and services that are out there saving or improving people's lives, but let's also make this real for the mayors and governors and the community members who live around these institutions. What role do these institutions' tech transfer efforts play in their local economies and their local innovation ecosystems? Julie, you unmuted first, so I'll go to you.
You hit on an area that I'm incredibly passionate about. Good ideas are not relegated to any one demographic or constrained to a geography or a gender. And this is something we have to understand. It's all over. Good ideas come from everywhere. And one of our goals at the University of Maryland is to make sure that every idea has a chance to survive. Now, there's lots of things that can kill a business idea or a technology, but we don't want it to be that nobody paid attention and that they didn't get the right training or the right resources or couldn't connect with the right talent. It might be that market's not ready. It might not be, that you can't make money at that. But that can't be why the cure for cancer could be sitting on a shelf in the Midwest, just as much as it could be at MIT, or Stanford or any of our institutions. And so making sure that these ideas have an opportunity to see the light of day is really important. But I think the second thing is that, as universities, it's not just about our own ideas, it's also about as Kathy said, it's building a village, right? And that village isn't just for our researchers and our technologies, it's for the whole community. And in fact, one of the things I found fascinating when I joined the University of Maryland, I realized the impact that our alumni and our students have out as entrepreneurs. So if you've ever worn an Under Armour shirt or garment, if you've ever played Fortnite or had to get your kids off of Fortnite, or eaten a Beyond Beef burger, put on a VR headset from Oculus, or set up your business on Squarespace. Those are all University of Maryland alumni companies. Skinny Pop or cauliflower crackers, which I as a gluten-free person greatly appreciate. Those are all from our alumni. And so while they might not have come out of the University of Maryland, that ecosystem that we're building to support our faculty and our technologies expands into the greater community if we're doing it right. And I think that's what's really exciting about, especially being a public land-grant institution for us, is how can we take this innovation and extend it way beyond our university walls and help build up the community so that those people with the good ideas around have the resources that they need and the opportunities to bring them to market. And sorry, I get a little excited about that because this is a real big passion point for me.
Right. Well, I think for the state institutions, this is actually part of the mandate. Like, at the private institutions like Columbia, our name is Columbia University in the city of New York. So we are very New York tied, but it is not literally part of the mission in the same way it might be for a University of Michigan or a University of Maryland. So Kelly, how does your relationship with the local community around the city and the state look to you, and why is your job important there?
Yeah, thanks. And I'll just say, Julie, I love the passion. I get just as excited when I'm talking about this. So we struggled with this when we were trying to develop the mission for our office. And because we are a global university, but at the same time, our region's economic development is super important to us. And I was really happy when we hit on this concept, which is we're inspired to redefine how world-class research can fuel a region and solve the world's greatest challenges. Our ultimate goal is to do what's best for the technology, for it to have its biggest and most broad impact on society and on the planet. So that's our North Star, is how do we move this technology out so that it can have the most positive impact that it can. But at the same time, we know that the more we do to bolster our region's startup and investment ecosystem, the easier our job is going to be down the road. The more talent there's going to be in the area to take our startup companies out of the university, the more investors we're going to have in our region. The more Ann Arbor is on the national, the attention of coastal VCs, and they become accustomed to flying here or dropping into Zoom calls for quarterly board meetings, the easier it will be for them to make their next investment. So we spend a lot of time on that. Our closest partner in our effort is our state economic development arm. And we have an incredible technology transfer talent network that we run out of the University of Michigan, but it's a statewide hub, and it allows mentors and residents, experienced business people, entrepreneurs, to connect with early stage startups and support taking them out of out of the lab and into commercialization, often as startup companies. We have 13 of these people on staff at U of M. Some of them are able to travel and go to the other universities. And it's really a way for us to share resources and talent and best practices. And I want to just say one thing. If our states in general spend as much time thinking about how they could support university innovation, translation, and commercialization as they spend thinking about how they can recruit companies from other states, I think our nation as a whole would be so much better off. The traditional state economic development approach, and this may be an anathema, but it's a race to the bottom in reducing taxes and trying to create incentives to move companies around within the country. Through innovation and technology transfer, we can create the companies of tomorrow. Our history is not our destiny. We have great research occurring all around the university. There are game-changing ideas that can create hundreds of jobs happening not just at the universities that have over $500 million of research on their campus. The smaller universities have great ideas with great potential as well. And I'd love for us to get to a place where there is actually focus and funding put on technology commercialization. And I hope that we have that opportunity through the Innovation and Competitiveness Act. And I applaud Autumn for pushing that forward.
Yeah. Lesley, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to spin this a little. You talked specifically about the impact in the communities, and I want to reflect back actually at my time at University of Illinois, and they have done much more since I have been there, and the work of both the Tech Transfer Office as well as Laura Frerichs at the Research Park and Incubator, but specifically the innovation with regard to underrepresented entrepreneurs and women. There was a program I think that was started there called AWARE, which was accelerating women and underrepresented entrepreneurs. It was hosted, the very first meeting was hosted at the Research Park in the Incubator. And the most fascinating thing about that was at the time, we were crammed into a small room at that time when actually we all met together without masks on. And the majority of people there came from the community. They came from people who were wanting to start businesses, small businesses, unrelated to university intellectual property. And so I think we have to think about the impact of having people amongst us who are trained in entrepreneurship, who are also having conversations with those who are unconnected to our universities and to the research entities that we belong to. And the impact of that, the trickle through, not down, but through of all the learnings and the knowledge and the transfer and the passion and the funding and the willingness to take risks in communities, to have banks who are willing to give small business loans to small enterprises who are just starting on a dime in a corner shop. That too is tech transfer of a different sort. And so when you talk about the impact in our region, I mean, we were very lucky at University of Illinois to have had significant infrastructure investment and the backing of the legislature and the administration of the university. But then through the building of an incubator and the opportunity to take federal funding to do programs that then became of interest to and were advertised to the community was a win that was not anticipated. And I think we should always think about, and then how does that trickle through to the partners that are around us, the communities that we are part of, as we are kind of plonked in the middle of Cambridge and Kendall Square and Somerville and all of the places within Boston. Those people see the passion of the students and the faculty, and they then think about what it is that they can do. And that should not be lost on us as we talk about the science and the research and all of those things, because that truly is where we have both regional and global impact.
Steve, I saw you unmuted.
Yeah, I just want to make two quick points. One focused on this local economic development, and the second on diversity. And so the first to pick up on what Kelly said, which was exactly right, is the importance of those universities around the United States that are absolutely influential in creating the next generation of companies and therefore jobs. And so, as I mentioned, Autumn's been collecting data for over 40 years. What we've shown, and just in 2020 alone, US universities accounted for over 1,100 new companies, 1,100 new companies that year alone. Of those 1,100 companies, more than 70% of them end up locating in that state, if not in right next door or attached to the university, given that that's the hub of where that research came from. So I just wanted to emphasize that point, that it does happen. I've been involved in companies where we've hired people that were either graduate students at the institution or at the technical college down the street to staff these new companies. So again, local economic development, it happens. We've got the stats around that. The second point I want to mention real quick, and it was mentioned briefly, this issue of diversity. And so one of the things that maybe I was remiss in saying earlier about the importance of this tech transfer legislation components in USICA that allows funding is right now, tech transfer is effectively an unfunded mandate. So as everybody knows here on the call and perhaps some on the line know, none of these institutions are receiving significant amounts of money to cover their patent costs at all, or their funding for their personnel. Yes, there's some SBIR, STTR opportunities. What that means is those that have tech transfer offices are self-funding those. Those that are self-funded possibly because they're on the larger side and have that funds to devote to a very important element of the university. Perhaps they've then had a couple of wins that have generated revenue that they can drive back. But think about all those institutions across the country that have brilliant scientists that just don't have that a lottery ticket was a term that was mentioned earlier, that don't have the money for that initial lottery ticket to create the infrastructure for tech transfer. This USICA and the tech transfer provision allows for the actual support and perhaps creation of tech transfer offices in those institutions that might not have had the size, the scale to afford that, yet have those groundbreaking innovations on their campus. So I just want to make those two quick points.
Yeah. Well, thanks. I've got one more question, but we're also running out of time. And so there were a couple of questions in the chat. I will try to get to some of those. If other people have questions, please put them in the chat. I'm going to try and focus on the ones that are relevant to sort of the federal policy landscape and the university policy landscape. I'm going to get to the promotion and tenure one in a minute. Ian has specifically, been pushing this one, and you put it in the chat, so I'm going to get to it. But in the meantime, so if you do have questions, put them in the chat. In the meantime, I do want to bring up patent policy. Because it's something that that was talked a lot about yesterday when we had former USPTO directors Kapos and Iancu on the line, as well as Judge Michelle. It was an amazing panel. But it is I talk about this when I think about what some of the biggest risks to this golden goose that we have created. There are many ways to kill a golden goose. But in this case, one of the fastest would be to undermine the patent system upon which this all relies. And one of the things that Andre Iancu mentioned yesterday, I think, and it came up a bunch of different times, is that patents are not a tax. They're not a way to extract money, and hold large monopolies. They are a way for small innovators to compete against the incumbents in a way that allows these new companies to be created when all they have to rely on and to fall back on is their intellectual property. Big players can defend their competitive advantage in many, many ways, but the small companies only really have their IP. And so without that no one will invest the venture capital required to bring these companies to market. No one will waste their time filing patent applications if they get undermined. And I think we are really at a critical juncture in this country. In terms of some of those risks, just around the certainty, if nothing else. And so I'm wondering, maybe Kathy, as someone who spent their whole career in the field, but really, if anyone else, as you look ahead to the changes in the IP landscape over the last 20 or 30 years, any advice you could give the federal government on what to not do or what they should do? Or, where do you see the big risks around IP?
So of course, I think patent protection is really important. And over the years, when I've worked in tech transfer, the patents have becoming narrower and narrower. And that's not good for us, because when we're able to invent something that is very basic, if we can get broad claims, that'll last a long time. But as the patent office is requiring more and more narrow scope, it really puts a risk on our kind of activity. The other area is the whole PTAB and so much controversy over how patent prosecution and how patents are granted is really a huge cost on universities. And it's a very big time sink. And as I was thinking of my talk on the Cohen-Boyer license, it's very interesting that 440 companies took a non-exclusive license. They didn't feel it was a tax. It was voluntary. I mean, these companies came forward. I never necessarily knew that they were there. But they came forward and wanted to recognize the university contribution to the industry, and they were willing to pay the little bit of royalty that we asked for. And I'm worried about the whole concept in high tech about efficient infringement, that doesn't give recognition to where creativity came from. And I feel like it's really important through patents to recognize who helped create this innovation and give them some recognition, whether it's through a startup company or royalty revenues back to the university and to the inventors. These things are important for just validating the value of what someone contributed to society.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I hope your message is heard. It's true. It's complicated when there are more and more ways. It's one thing, we have sort of a twin problem here, right? Because on one hand, the patents that are getting issued are narrower and narrower with narrower claims and more areas that are considered non-patentable. And that's challenging because then it's harder to get patents that actually provide enough coverage for someone to bother investing money to bring this new product or new service to life. And then there's the inter-parties review and other post-grant reviews that even after a patent's awarded, it's often not clear if it would survive a challenge and therefore how much you can bank an investment in it. And I often make the analogy that if think about the commercial real estate market, if people got title to a piece of land and even 10% of the time after you built your skyscraper or manufacturing plant or shopping mall, if 10% of the time someone could later come by and challenge that title and get the land back underneath that hundreds of millions of dollars worth of investment, the entire commercial real estate market would fall apart. Nobody would invest a single dollar in building a building, even if it was 10%, 5%, 1% of the time that land changed hands. The reason the commercial real estate works is because that doesn't happen. That is a Six Sigma event. And in the patent industry, that's changed. Those dynamics have changed. Where even once you get the patent, you don't necessarily know if it'll get taken away, and that uncertainty makes it very, very hard for any market to exist. It's really very hard to have a market if you don't have certainty. Kathy.
And I also know that now from the startup side, they're spending a tremendous amount of time and effort thinking about patent strategy, because again, each patent is much more narrow than they used to be, and they're having to file far more patents than they would have in the past, I think.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask Ian's question, and then if we have time, we'll come to a couple of others. And I'd like to wrap up with a comment from Steve, but which I'll feed you the question in a moment. But Ian's question was around patent, about innovation and entrepreneurship in promotion and tenure on university campuses. And I know this is a polarizing question, but I think the idea behind this is that if the federal government, if the NIH and the NSF is increasingly putting things around innovation and entrepreneurship into their grant proposals, and if universities are caring more and more about this, then the question is, I guess, should innovation and entrepreneurship and patenting and inventing be part of the promotion and tenure process at most American universities. And Julie, you're off mic, so I'm going to hope that means you're ready to answer that one.
I am. And actually, so there's a question of should, and then even if it is it effective? So the experience that I've had at the University of Maryland, we do have promotion and tenure policy that includes innovation and patenting, which is great. However, the tenure is decided at the very local level. So it's the tenure committee that considers that. And whether or not they include that in their consideration is up to them. And so what I see is that the policy is great, but the culture shift is really what's needed. We really need to have the culture shift so that we can really talk about, in fact, I don't use the word commercialization anymore because it's a dirty word to most of my faculty members, right? I talk about translating their research into impact because that's why most of them are in it. They're not in it, they're like, I'm not here to be rich, although they take it if it came, but what they want is they want impact. And so having it as a policy is one thing, and I think it is a good thing, but having consistent ways to measure it, it's easy to measure citations and publications and all of that. This is a little bit harder to measure. And so I think putting it in there is one thing, measuring it is another thing, but then shifting the culture to actually recognize it and implement it, I think is another challenge that needs to be addressed.
I have a really strong opinion about this. I feel like it's not a good thing for tech transfer. We need to watch out for this because I think faculty then will just disclose lots and lots of inventions and pressure universities to file on them. And they may or may not be the ones that you want to have. And so I feel there would be a much greater pressure to process more and more inventions. And then we have a lot of inventors who disclose a lot and they're never licensed. And we have some inventors that disclose a little bit and are licensed, very successfully. And I think it's just very hard to compare these apples and oranges. And I think it would put undue pressure on the tech transfer offices.
I think what Julie said about culture is key. I mean, if you have an entrepreneurship, if you have a community that supports entrepreneurship, they're going to allow entrepreneurial sabbaticals for faculty. There's going to be more of an expectation that startup companies are going to be part of somebody's outside professional activities. There's going to be easy ways in which those outside professional activities are managed and conflict of interest is managed. And having systems and processes in place that don't deter people from doing it, but support them in what they're doing, quite frankly, are much better than counting patents or whatever somebody's measure might be.
Mike Clear, who was my first boss when I joined at Columbia, then went on to UPenn, great guy and a great mentor, used to describe that our business is we're farming someone else's orchard. The faculty are getting the grants they get and researching what they want to research because they're driven by intellectual curiosity and wanting to make a difference in the world. And that's the trees at an institution. And what our job is to go collect the fruit that happens to be on those trees and make the best jams and pies we can out of those. And so, I think from our perspective at Columbia, we don't have promotion that as part of the promotion and tenure process, although I don't think we were necessarily against it. It just hasn't gotten there yet. In the remaining minute of this panel, I wanted to turn to Steve. If people in the audience are interested in this topic and would like to either, if they're legislative on the legislative side and they want more information on how the university tech transfer and university innovation views on the policy landscape, or would like to have any follow-up questions, who are the guides that they can turn to? And for those of us in the university world, same question. If any of us on the call would like to get involved in helping to shape or provide context for the federal policy landscape, how do we help? How do we learn and how do we help?
Yep. So that's a great question. And so on the university side, and as the panelists know, really the best way is to reach out to the federal relations person you have at your institution. You've got those relationships with legislators on your campus or that associate with your campus. That's the best initial way to actually have the voice of your institution heard. So that's through your federal relations person. In terms of providing resources and feedback, there are a number of great resources that are out there. Autumn has a whole website. If you just type in Autumn Speaks Out, you'll actually see different pieces we have where we support various types of legislation. AAU and APLU also often have their own releases, and actually they both have releases specifically on USICA. And so I'd encourage both of you to look at those as resources going forward.
Great. And with that, I'm afraid we are out of time. I just wanted to thank this fabulous panel. Kathy for kicking this off. That was a really great perspective. And Kelly, Julie, Lesley, and Steve, thank you for joining us. Thank you to CSIS, to the University of Kentucky, to Autumn, to hosting us here today and to putting this panel together. Please do come back for this afternoon's panel on the economic impact of tech transfer. We have some really great panelists coming, and thank you all for joining us today.